Hello once again, and welcome to Beyond the Lane with your hosts. I am Jared Wynn, bringing you one more night of exciting League of Legends pro scene discussion, and I am joined, of course, by my co-host, the one, the only, Yamato Cannon. How are you doing tonight, Yamato?
Very, very good. A late night, a bit tired, but I can always talk about League, man, especially with you, anytime. You can wake me up anytime.
Let's wake you up with some great League discussion, some great meaty League talk like only we can provide to our wonderful viewers. And we'll start with the highlight match, let's say, of the week, the most hyped match of the week, certainly, and that was Cloud9 versus TSM, the old rivalry, the multiple-time LCS final, coming back to us a series in the regular season split this time. Your general thoughts on the series and how it played out, Yamato?
You know, like, we've been talking about how C9 look good without high, but to be honest, it feels like it's getting worse. They played against TSM, sure, you could call them the best team in North America right now, so comparing the macro play right there might be harsh, but C9 look very, very thoughtless and kind of idealist in especially the first game. The second game, you know, they took home a victory, but I think it was more on TSM with the fact that they blind pick Aurelia into a Trundle master, if you want to call Impact that, because, you know, sure, Trundle is not hard to play, but Impact has showed in the past that he can do a lot of great things with Trundle, and I think blind picking Aurelia into Trundle player is very, very dangerous, and they got punished for it. In general, I felt like Cloud9, you know, this series didn't excite me as much because it was very, very clear that they were playing very, very reactive. They were behind on most of the Drake plays, and they were behind on pressuring the map with the potential lanes where they could pressure. They were only responding to TSM's plays, and I felt like they didn't really adjust in the pick and ban. They were stuck in an idea from the start. Even after TSM showed that they had high priority on Nidalee, they still put high priority on Rek'Sai, even though TSM picked Nidalee over Rek'Sai, which shows that they just didn't adjust throughout pick and ban either.
Now, Cloud9 still overall playing pretty well at 4-2. Is this more an example of TSM just being the best team in the region right now, or is it more an example of Cloud9 not stepping up to the plate when against a great team?
I think, you know, with C9 in mind, you know, it's my words might be extra harsh in this particular case, but the real question is how good is TSM if they made a team that is 4-2 look very, very clueless. And I think TSM right now are in a very, very good state, and I think C9 is still up there where they belong, you know, among the top 4, if you want to call them that.
Right, well, TSM did play a close series with CLG in the NALCS final, and CLG then went on to get second to MSI. So perhaps, by proxy, TSM the third best team in the world. Perhaps, maybe, maybe not. Just putting it out there. Yeah.
Sure.
Talking about Cloud9, though, they've continued their substitute strategy with a support role. Some alliteration there for you if you're paying attention. Kind of weird, strange, Bunny, Fufu, and Smoothie. We've talked about before how Bunny looked like the better player, so why continue to put Smoothie in that position?
Well, they have to see something in Smoothie that we don't, or I don't, because I still think it's clear that Bunny Fufu is the better player. Maybe it's a question of maybe Bunny Fufu is looking for other things in the future. Maybe he has some concerns about something. You know, it's very, very hard to see from an outside perspective. I think Bunny Fufu is clearly the better player. I think he's a better fit. And, you know, especially in summer, I think you have to consider the fact that, you know, maybe Smoothie is C9's future in the end. But in this particular case, you know, they're still in a fine running for playoffs where they can, you know, with 4-2, I think it's almost guaranteed playoffs if you look at it from this perspective. Sure, things can change, but I think it's fine to invest a little bit of time into something that they potentially think can be super good, because, you know, from my perspective, I don't see it, but I'm sure C9 sees something in Smoothie. Otherwise, it would make no sense.
Hopefully they do. If they just do it because they feel like it, that would be kind of strange. Now, it is true in the summer, you know, maybe you look towards a 2017 lineup with Smoothie in the mix, but you have Worlds. Cloud9 would probably like to get to Worlds and maybe have an impact there. Just the pun would be have an impact, yeah.
It's like, sure, they can, you know, I think if they realize, they will probably realize that Bunny Fufu is the better player if nothing changes throughout the split, and I think they're just going to use him throughout the playoffs. I think that is kind of the beauty with the position they are in. I think they can almost, you know, they can sleep with no worries about the potential of not going to playoffs. I think that's almost guaranteed for C9's case.
Yeah, if we see them substituting Smoothian during the playoffs, we'll have to ask further questions, I think, about this. But for the time being, we'll let them get off the hook. Now, you mentioned that their decision-making without High looks to be a problem still. What, to you, is emblematic of that? Is it the rotations being off? Is it the ganks being called incorrectly? Like, what do you point at as saying, okay, this is where High's shot calling is missed for this team. They're still struggling with that.
I feel like, individually, I think they are performing well in a lot of cases. I think Meteor still looks rusty, sometimes here and there on his Gragas, but I think it's sufficient for the position they're in on the standings. I think sometimes what I feel is lacking is pressuring turrets at the right time and defending turrets at the right time. They give up a lot of objectives for free, and I feel like, League of Legends is about planning 1 minute ahead and making sure your waves are in the right position at the right timing. It feels like with C9, it is a lot, oh, Drake is spawning, let's check it out, and let's see what's happening there. And usually if you have this kind of mindset in-game, you're going to be too late to a lot of objectives. And I feel like that is the case against TSM in particular.
With TSM, do you feel like they've gotten a handle now on how to split the resources? Because one of the big questions when Doublelift went to TSM was, how does a team with Bjergsen, with Doublelift, and even to some extent with Svenskeren, with Hanser, how do they split the resources, their CS in a game? Do you feel like they've gotten a better feel for how to manage their combined powers?
Like, personally, the talk about resources is always something that, amazes me, because I think it doesn't really apply to League at all. And I'm saying that because usually the resources players have are the resources they take. Everyone has a lane to play on, everyone has a minion wave to farm, and usually if your team plays correctly, you're always going to have a lane to farm. Because in any composition that you play, a 1-3-1, a 1-1-3, usually a combination that is built around farming 3 lanes. I think 1-4 at this point in time is very outdated, and it's all about the 1-3-1, 1-1-3. You're always going to have a lane to farm and a lane to play on. So with that in mind, when you talk about CS distribution and resource distribution, I think it's a question of, are players good enough to take these resources themselves? And usually with players that people say take a lot of resources or don't take a lot of resources, they have weaker and better play. So I think the conversation about resources is something that doesn't really apply to League. Sure, in the past it was like, oh, let's just put all the farm on AD carry, and people just sat 4 people in mid, and you just cleared minion waves, and the AD carry ran back and forth and killed CS. That is no longer the case. I think the game is very, very high pace, and it's a question of putting pressure on the map more than just, oh, we need CS on our AD carry.
Do you think Doublelift misses those days, the good old days? He just had the whole map CS.
I think every AD carry misses those days. I think every player that used to be that 1v9 player misses those days, because those days are never going to come back. I'm thinking Uzi, Faker, I'm thinking Forgiven, Doublelift as well. There's been a lot of those players that just grabbed everything and did great things with it, but the game is just not like that anymore.
Well, moving on now from TSM and C9, we have another team near the top of the standings that is a lesser name. The organization's kind of big, but the league team is lesser name. That's Envious. They seem to get by with a easier schedule to begin the split, but they've now had a more of a wake-up call, I guess you could call it, playing CLG. What's the read on Envious? Did they just have an easy schedule for the opening record? Did they really deserve it?
I think they've shown some good qualities. I think the easy schedule certainly helps, because they have players that are not as experienced as the others in LCS, but in general, I feel like this team has a macro play. I think the combination of Ninja and Seraph has been deadly in the past and is still very, very deadly. I think this team shows no fear in draft. They are willing to take risks. I'm thinking about the game against Immortals in particular, where they punished the Azir with this Varus and played this poke composition, which is something that not a lot of teams have the balls to do. And I think this is definitely the correct thinking when you face the teams that are on paper better than you. But in general, you say they have had a tough schedule this week, and I completely agree with you. I think against COG, they definitely showed COG's weaknesses in the game, and they also highlighted their strengths. And I think there has been a lot of focus on Ninja and Seraph in particular, but one player that truly impressed me this week has to be LOD. I think coming into the split and looking at that team, I thought he would be the obvious weakness, but he has definitely shown that he definitely is comfortable on the LCS stage and did some big plays in those games. I think against Immortals, it was very, very close and competitive, but in the end, in those long games where it's pushed to the limit, where a team has Baron and Elder Dragon, then it becomes a question of experience. And if you're going to measure the experience of MVS against Immortals, then, you know, it's an unfair fight. And with that in mind, I think MVS are looking very, very good. And I think they have progressed. And I think with experience, they can definitely be a top contender. And they already are, to be honest.
So you would call them a lock playoff team?
I think they could do very well at playoffs.
Okay, we'll see. You mentioned Envy bettering CLG. We talked about CLG a couple times now. They seem to still be struggling to get back into their form from MSI. That vacation post-MSI pre-summer really hurt them, I guess. Vacation is not good for anyone, it turns out. What does CLG specifically need to do better? Like, what, if you could make one change as a coach, would make CLG a better team to get them back on track? Because 2-4 is not where they expected to be, I'm sure, and certainly not what their fans thought they would be after getting second place at MSI.
You know, I'm very, very ready to let go of the excuse of taking a break because, you know, we're 3 weeks in. Now it's no longer an excuse. With that in mind, I feel like the glaring issue for COG has to be the mid lane. The mid lane, who he shows that when any responsibility falls on his shoulder, when he's not the supportive player that is supposed to kind of add to Stixxay's strength, then he really, really looks weak. And I think that's a massive, massive issue. Right now, the meta is, you know, you could call it mid-centric, but you can also call it not mid-centric just because it's kind of Victor Azir all over again. But I feel like teams are starting to learn how to pressure more through mid. And I think he always gets pushed in, and he's getting pushed in matchups where he should do fine. And I think, in general, the weakness of COG is in mid lane. And I think when the meta looks more towards, you know, the Lulu, and when he gets to play his Rise, then he looks fine. But these champions are very, very easy to play. And I think when anything about, you know, responsibility falls on his shoulder, or he's supposed to have like a carry performance on this specific champion in this specific matchup, he just doesn't pull through.
Do you think, as I ask the tough questions here, CLG regret losing Pobelter?
Well, Pobelter, I think Pobelter is better. I think Pobelter definitely is better, but the question is, would Pobelter be looking as good as he does now on Immortals if he was on COG?
Right.
I'm not too sure because, you know, Pobelter, I remember the conversation about Pobelter, you know, back to the resources thing. Oh, this is a mid laner that gets so little resources, he doesn't get any help, blah, blah, blah. And I always thought the same thing as I mentioned earlier, you know, this is a guy that just randomly falls behind in CS and mid lane, and that has nothing to do with resources. That has, you know, if resources are on the ground and you're not taking them, that is not the issue of the team. And Pobelter, you know, in a team that is winning, looks fine. In a team that is like COG in this case, I can't say for sure if he would be the saving grace. But I definitely think he is a better player than Huhi overall.
I have a feeling that CLG fans wish they still had Pobelter in the lineup, but
yeah, for sure.
They don't, and he's not coming back anytime soon. He seems happy with Immortals, so we'll see if CLG can get their act together with Huhi in the lineup. Maybe make playoffs for summer. That's a good goal, I think, to shoot for at this point, you know, being 2-4. Try to get into playoffs and see how it works out from there. Now, Team Liquid were involved in a couple of interesting stories this past week. We'll start with their actual lineup and their play. Fabi apparently asked himself into the roster, and they played quite well with him, and the roster, I should say, going, I believe, 2-0 on the weekend. Now, he played some support champions, played some Ashe, some Sivir, didn't carry the games himself, but Team Liquid did play well with him. Is there any thought at all to putting Fabi into the role that Piglet occupies at ADC?
I feel like, you know, it comes down to the Pobelter thing I mentioned earlier. You know, it's easy to look good when you're winning. I definitely think Piglet is the better player. But in this case, you know, playing Ashe and playing Sivir in these cases, you know, it's nothing that is too challenging. I don't think, personally, from my point of view, I wouldn't give all the credit to Fabi. I think in this case, he did fine, but doing fine when your team is winning is not something spectacular. I wouldn't judge him too fast. Why the decision happened, I'm not too sure. I think it has to be internal. There's been problems in the past with Piglet, or maybe there is motivational issues that we see a lot of those with AD carries nowadays. Maybe some forgiven drama here and there, but I think in general, I don't want to judge Fabi too fast.
Yeah, I think Phoenix and Dardoch had something to say about those wins as well as Fabi did. You know, perhaps a little bit of credit to those guys. But is it a question though, perhaps of, you know, would Piglet play supportive ADCs for the team when Fabi would? Like, is it a better team fit perhaps if Fabi's more willing to be a supportive ADC in this current meta than Piglet is? Is that a factor at all?
I think whenever you have a player that thinks he is bigger than the team, when his ego is bigger than the team, when he's not willing to put himself on the line for the team, he should not be in the team. I think regardless how big of a player this is, no player should be bigger than the team. So if it is the case that what you're telling me, that he is just doesn't want to play Sivir or Ashe because he doesn't think he can carry on these champions, then I definitely think that he deserves to sit on the bench.
By the way, I don't know that. Completely a theoretical argument I'm proposing here, so we don't want to start any rumors here, you know, get in the front page of Reddit for a bad reason. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible that Piglet has a more aggressive mindset going into games and prefers to play more aggressive champions. And if Fabi can play the Ashe and the Sivir of the world, then, you know, maybe that's a different look for them. Worked out this week, but again, Dardoch carrying them a little bit, Phoenix carrying them a little bit, that also helps quite a bit. Talking about Piglet, we had an interesting story here where he was quoted saying about Phoenix 1, the last place team in the LCS. I'm going to read this quote here from Piglet. Just looking at it from a mechanical level, it's way too low. Their gameplay in general is really bad. To call themselves pros, it's like seeing these guys in the LCS kind of disheartening. Now, we sometimes have teams who get into the LCS, Yamato, and they don't quite play to the level of a professional League of Legends team. Phoenix 1 seems to be a one split and done team. You know, we'll almost certainly have a different organization, different roster, next split. Well, you know, I shouldn't say that for sure, but we'll have some changes. I think we're going to see next split in the spring of 17. What do you think as a coach and as just a person who's a fan of the game when you see a team like this who's clearly not on the level of the rest of the competition, who clearly is a placeholder roster? It would seem to me, again, don't want to start any rumors here.
It is, you know, I think it's a question of survival of the fittest. In the end, you know, as leagues go on and slots are not being sold because the teams got banned, I think that the LCS, I think EU LCS is a good example of how something is saturated in terms of like the 50 top players in the region are playing in the EU LCS. I think overall, like the saturation of EU LCS is pretty good. Over in NALCS, of course, we had these bans here and there. Of course, you're going to have a team that just doesn't know what they're doing and pick up a bunch of players. I think in this case as well, there are players that prefer to be on challenger teams because they feel like they can do better than this random organization that came out of nowhere, Phoenix 1. I don't even know the owner. I don't know anything about this organization. So I think, you know, in terms of the competitiveness in NA, I definitely believe Phoenix 1 is going to disappear after the split. I think the competitiveness in the Challenger series is just too hard over in North America. So I think just give it time, Piglet. Survival of the fittest, that is the rule that fits in. Eventually, North American LCS will also be saturated, and hopefully teams won't get suspended and banned.
Is it a bad look for the game when you have a team that seems so clearly below the level of the other teams at the top level?
Well, I think, you know, it's always been like that. You know, in every region, there's always been that team. It's like, why is this team here? They're just losing games. But, you know, in order for there to be winners, there need to be losers too. And, you know, I think I want to just refer back to the ULCS. I think, you know, there are some teams that look like the bottom teams, but the games against these bottom teams are looking more competitive and more competitive all the time as we proceed. And I think that speaks to the saturation of ULCS, and I think every region can reach that point.
Yeah, in order to have TSM, you must have Phoenix 1. I guess that's what we're saying here. That's kind of the way it goes. Now, a couple of highlights from the NALCS week that we had in play. Starting with Cloud9 versus Apex. Cloud9 initiating a fight that looks good at first, but then Apex gets a good turn from Mix Special to turn their fortune around in the fight. Let's see if we have that queued up to play to you. Here it is.
So in this case, we need to keep in mind 48 minutes into the game, C9's composition is not going to be as effective as Apex composition because they have the Sivir, an AD carry that scales very, very well. And of course, if you look at this fight from a DPS race perspective, there is just no way C9 can win. Lissandra doesn't do too much if she doesn't one-shot one target or grabs onto a lot of people. But when people have items like the QSS, the cleanse, then she's not going to do much. And that is just a fact. Sivir in these fights definitely is going to put out more DPS than the Lucian. Cassiopeia, 10 times more DPS than the Lissandra. So there's just no way from a raw DPS perspective that C9 is going to win this unless they one-shot a carry straight up. And that is very, very hard to do against a Sivir that has a shield, a Guardian Angel, a cleanse Cassiopeia. It is just too difficult 48 minutes into the game. The mistake C9 did was probably like 28 minutes ago, where they had the window of strength with the Shen, with the Lissandra. Everything on their composition just says fall off. And falling off compositions and 48 minutes into the game is not a good combination.
We have a second play here, which is kind of similar in the fact that Casual Logic Gaming starts the play against, I believe it's Envy, yes. They get a pick, but then things get turned around on them by the picked on team. That is Envy with LOD Lod coming up big in the slot.
So this is the play that C9 wish they would have done. You look at the composition of Envy and 24 minutes into the game, Lissandra's going to have a massive spike. We have the catch of Morgana, but the support, with the arrow drawn and all these abilities used, that's completely fine to make a trade-off of. But Lissandra, very effective, hits 4 people with the W, roots them. That is a very, very efficient play overall. And of course, these champions like the Trundle, the Lissandra, and Elise and Lucian, very, very strong in the mid-game and the early game. So in these fights, very, very powerful. Of course, a Lucian is going to outshine an Ashe that needs a couple of items to get going. And of course, this beautiful Lissandra play is what kind of saved it, in my opinion. If she catches on to 4 people, it is going to be a good fight. And I think the composition of Envy, definitely in this type of zone and this time of game, is just going to be very, very effective.
How do you feel about Lissandra in the meta right now?
I think she has a place as a counterpick against most of the assassins like the LeBlanc and of course the Zeds and the Fizz. But if those champions don't see play, I think she struggles a lot against the long-range mages. I think Victor, Azir definitely have an edge against Lissandra, and that is the reason why these champions came into the meta to begin with, because we had this Lissandra-centric meta where everyone played Lissandra every single game, and some people just thought outside the box. Long-range mages that push Lissandra into the tower are the perfect picks. So with that in mind, I mentioned a couple of picks that are in the meta that are good against her. I don't think Lissandra is too good. I think she's fine as a counter pick and maybe like a champion that complements a specific jungler where the enemy mid laner can't really pick cleanse as a summon spell. I think in those scenarios is also fine, but I still feel like the long range mages that typically are being played are good into Lissandra, which makes her a weaker pick right now.
Let's move on now to the EU LCS, the week that was over there. And the biggest match, I think, on paper was H2K versus G2. Want to get your general thoughts now on this series, kind of the counter to TSM Cloud9.
I think G2, coming into the series, I definitely thought they were the better team. I think the hype revolved around the match. I didn't really agree with it. G2, the second game definitely punished what are they called? H2K to the limit, the early first blood, and of course the play on top, and they just snowballed that into a victory. The first game was a bit slower, and G2 definitely were in a winning position, but there was this one point in time where they kind of, they had 2 Infernal decks. Eventually they had 3 Infernal decks, if I remember correctly as well. They had a 2k gold lead without anything happening in terms of kills. They were definitely playing their composition right with the 1-3-1, but then they just overreached and forgot they're playing against the Bard. Vander lands a beautiful ultimate at a wrong time in the game, and this Bard ultimate kind of wins the game for them because they kind of translate it into a Baron. And if you have a 1-3-1 composition that tries to play against a 5v5 kind of teamfight composition, when you have Baron, you can play to your composition strength. And if you play to your composition strength and the enemy team can't play to theirs, they are going to look very, very weak, and the game is going to look very, very sad and depressing and very one-sided. With that in mind, I definitely think G2, even in the first game, besides this one crucial mistake with the Bard play in mid, I think they looked like a better team up until that point, but this mistake was just a game-losing mistake, and that's fine. That happens sometimes. I think across the board, G2 still looked like the stronger team, and I think the series went kind of as I expected, but it's hard to predict a Bard Ultimate kind of winning a game.
Now, continuing to look at the top 3 teams in Europe, we also have Fnatic. We've criticized at times their draft, their pick and ban phase, looking into their performance in weeks 1 and 2. Do you think Fnatic's making progress there? Is it still a problem for them?
I think the approach Fnatic had this week definitely came down to, I think they just dropped all their ideas and went down the list and just played comfort picks. I feel like they played champions that the players kind of identify by. Maybe they are not the strongest meta picks right now, but these are the champions that, when I think of these players, these are the champions they will play. We have Gamsu on Gnar, we have the Azir on Forbidden, we have the Ezreal on Reckless, and we've got, I think Braum was banned most games against Yellow Star because a lot of people think that's the only thing he can play. And he played a bunch of other stuff, but that's irrelevant. And then you have the Nidalee on Spirit, which he, of course, is famous for. And with that in mind, I feel like the approach definitely has changed into something more about comfort than just what they think is the best in-game at the time. I think definitely in the games that they played, they showed mechanical prowess on the specific champions, so it worked out in that regard. Some sick Azir shuffles here and there, some sick Gnar ultimates. I know I've been a victim of them, so I know that feeling very, very well. And Spirit on his Nidalee as well outpaces, as soon as he sees one opening, he's going to take that. So the comfort really, really kind of showed in Fnatic's play when it came to these specific champions.
Moving on now to Roccat, there was some discussion about their early game or lack thereof this past week. Some struggles there, also perhaps some specific tactical planning of forgiving or forsaking early game in order to be stronger in the late game. Do you think this meta is suitable for a give up the early game for a stronger late game strategy like that?
I don't think I would be, I don't think it's viable at all. I don't think, you basically, you're basically giving your car keys to the enemy. You're putting yourself in the back seat and you just drive and we'll see what happens. Maybe you drive off a cliff and I survive, perfect. But you're giving the enemy team a chance to do whatever they want. If you have a composition that is going to lose in the early game and eventually be better late game, then you're just giving the enemy the upper hand from the start. And I don't think that is a strategy that is viable. In Rocket's case, they've played the same way even the previous splits. Their early game has been very interesting and very good in some cases, but I think people are finally figuring out what they're doing every game. And that is Airwax, sit around mid, Betsy, play as if Airwax is your shadow all the time. And finally, people are punishing it in a way that is so heavily, like it just shines through the play so much. Betsy, there are moments where Airwax is not around because he is pressured in the jungle, and he plays as if Airwax is around and gets completely punished and dies to very, very obvious ganks. So with that in mind, I think against Roccat, their strategy is showing, their improvement is next to non-existent, and I think they have the same glaring issues as before. They play the same way and they are very predictable.
Remaining in the middle of the table now, Schalke 04 had hype because of the name, if not anything else, the football club name. We've seen them now for a few weeks. We've gotten a good feel for them. Do you think the middle of the table is where they're destined to be? Could they be a upper playoff team, upper seed? Any possibility of that?
Right now, I don't think that will happen. I think with Schalke, the issues they had the previous split are showing through. Their pick and ban is not creative. It feels like they just take ideas from what they see in other games and they fail to add any of their own flavor into it. So I felt personally when we played up against them, I felt like I could predict every single pick they would do and just pick accordingly. And it felt like we could prepare very specific things against Schalke because, once again, it feels like they are very, very predictable. And, one glaring issue I feel is, in their case, there are moments where they become very impatient. They do very, very good things in game, very, very positive things in game, things that some of the other teams don't do, which are like playoff quality things, but then they just lose their patience. For example, Gilius, I think, is the one I want to highlight the most. He has this way about him where if nothing happens for him or if he doesn't gain an advantage early on, then he tends to do very, very crazy shit. And when he does crazy shit, Schalke loses. And I feel like this is a big issue where patience has to be there on top competitive league. Patience is very important. Sometimes in-game, nothing is going to happen because no team is going to make a mistake. Then patience is very important. And I feel like Schalke lacks that a lot. If nothing happens or if the enemy team plays accordingly towards their play, they tend to just, instead of aiming their gun, just firing it widely, and it's not working out at all.
Where does that correction come from? Is it a coach who can say, hey, slow things down? Is it the players having to say, hey, we're going to slow ourselves down with our playmaking? Like, who has to make that correction, you think, for the most part?
I think definitely this is something a coach can do, because I think, I didn't really look at Schalke with a, sure, I looked at their games before we played them, but I didn't really inspect heavily their mistakes and looked from it from a coach perspective. But I think if I, sure, I watch the games, but if I can recognize these problems where they are just shooting wildly, I think in particular, the person I want to highlight the most is Gilius in this case. I think this is definitely something that can be solved through coaching. I know Gilius personally, but I don't know how he works in like a team atmosphere, but I know he's a person that wants to affect the game as much as possible. Sometimes he wants to affect the game more than he's able to do. And that kind of pushes him over the cliff where he does, he body slams into 5 people and looks behind him and realizes his team is not there, or something crazy like this where he just throws away an advantage or throws away a situation for his team.
A couple of highlights now from Europe. We start with Vitality versus Unicorns of Love, and Cavalshard, who we've spoken of as being kind of held hostage in his own team, shaking the bonds of Vitality and showing his own prowess, his own potential now against Unicorns of Love. I think we have that here to demonstrate. Yes, here it is.
So I think, personally, whenever I see Jin, I'm curious about this pick because it's so strange to me. I think Jin has a problem against every single AD carry in the game. I mean, top lane, not a top lane carry in the game, or top lane champion like Maokai, it could be Aurelia, it could be whatever champion you can think of. Jin will struggle against his champion. And in this case, I don't know before the clip what Veritas was actually doing, but he should be nowhere close to the mid lane alone, because Jin is a champion that needs 4 people around him. Zyra specifically, he needs a bunch of stuff around him to protect him. And I think it just starts off in such a bad way for UL, so they can't really recover. And I think if an AD carry dies early in the fight, then it's just time to run away.
Unfortunately, the clip was so exciting, it actually broke, I think, the replay machine we have in the back. It's actually like a giant computer just dedicated to showing replays. So now that it's gone, I mean, what can we do? We'll have to fix it after the show. But we'll get it fixed for next week, I promise. One more note on teams here. We go over to Asia for a bit, and specifically Korea. SK Telecom T1. They took their first loss, losing to Jin Air Green Wings in a 2-1 split. I will mention, by the way, that Jin Air lost to CLG at IEM. So that means I think CLG is now better than SKT roundabout. Just throwing it out there. The 2-4 team in NALCS better than the first place team in LCK. Anyway, Jin Air beating SKT. Is SK Telecom T1? Do they have anything to worry about? Like, is it just the case of a weakness being found, or is it just you're going to lose some games eventually?
I feel I hate to use the term in competitive, because people don't tend to take it seriously. But SK Telecom, they were trolling. They were not playing serious. They were playing and picking horribly. So the first game, they completely dumpstered Jin Air. just as everyone expected. You know, no offense to Jinner. That just happens when you play against SK Telecom. The second game, we have this composition with a Lulu, with a Jin, and you're asking yourself, you know, Lulu Jin, how does that make sense? You know, Lulu is good with things that like to buy a lot of attack speed, maybe a Kog'Maw, maybe here and there. You know, there's some synergy with but there's no synergy at all with, of course, a Jin, because the problem always with Jin, if you play a supported mid laner, is that you're not going to kill any tanks, you're not going to kill any tanks at all, because you just don't have any DPS output, especially with Lulu and Jin. In this case, they were playing against a Vladimir, created an advantage for themselves, but Lulu, you know, Faker decided to flash into 5 people, died, and then his team followed, because you just follow Faker, that is law, and they died as well. Vladimir got a triple kill. All of a sudden, you know, you realize you have Jin, Lulu, and you want to try to kill a Vladimir, and it just doesn't work. The third game, it was even worse than that. I think Faker just went full troll mode. I don't know why. You put him on a blind pick LeBlanc, and he just goes into this full feeding frenzy. I don't think SKT showed, you know, I don't think Jenner exposed any weakness. Maybe they put something in their food that made them pick this strangely, pick this bad. But SKT, definitely, they were trolling.
Perhaps there's the weakness then. The desire to troll is the weakness for SK Telecom T1. If they get bored,
just lose the game as hard as possibly you can, and just hope SKT are going to troll the next one.
Don't let them take you seriously. That's the key, and you'll be fine. You'll be good to go. Now, you mentioned some bans earlier in the NA LCS. We're going to discuss that with a friend of ours, Rob Leonyx, currently working with Energy Esports, formerly working with Renegades. Now, to catch you up on that again, I want to read the TLDR that Riot posted on the Renegades ban. As we get there, and I'm going to have it on the screen, I believe. Here it is, yes. Renegades management has been found to have knowingly violated the competitive ban against Chris Badawi, misrepresented their relationship with TDK, and compromised player welfare and safety. Both the Renegades organization and TDK organization will no longer be allowed to continue participating in Riot-sanctioned leagues. In addition, Chris Badawi will be permanently banned from association or affiliation with any team or organization participating in a Riot-sanctioned league. Christopher, as in Monty, is banned for 1 league for 1 year from holding any Riot-sanctioned position within a competing organization. Chris and Sean Shim of TDK are indefinitely banned from association or affiliation with an organization in a Riot-sanctioned league, subject to first review in January 2019. That's a ways off, as a matter of fact. This was a big story for a while. We're going to talk about it just briefly here, and then also talk about how Energy is doing these days with Rob. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Hey, nice to be back on the show for such a long time.
Yeah, nice to have you here, of course. I'm glad that we still are all around to receive you, as a matter of fact. Now, we'll talk about Energy in a second, but I want to start, of course, with the Renegades discussion. It's kind of been, wasn't that publicly discussed, you know? It was kind of just put under the blanket after it came out. There was a lot of discussion over what these interpersonal issues were on the team, like what the safe environment was or wasn't. Some of the players spoke out, some did not. There were differing opinions there. I want to ask you, as a member of the staff of Renegades, what's your feeling when Riot talks about the unsafe environment that Renegades had?
Well, the safe environment, I mean, it's a strange ruling in my eyes, just because the ruling was definitely designated to our owners at the time. And I think the #1 saving grace that I have to appreciate Riot for is the clause in the middle of the article, or I mean at the end of it, where it says the general manager and the players and coaching staff didn't have anything to deal with any of these things. So to be honest, the unsafe environment I can't really comment on, because I was unaware of some form of a safe environment. Even my League of Legends manager at the time, he even had publicly said what unsafe environment. Everyone was fine, to my knowledge, up to the standards of LCS caliber.
I think one person who might have commented negatively, because most came out and supported Renegades, was Ermilia. She was, of course, separated from the team for some time with that whole, that divorce, if you will, that happened there. Was there any issue in your mind that might have stood out there that might have brought about this unsafe environment part of the ruling?
I mean, so that's a strange conflict, right? I don't think Maria had anything against us. It was mostly Christopher Badawi. I think that's pretty obvious to public knowledge. But
you mean that she didn't have anything against the players or team, that she had something against Chris, perhaps?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can probably confirm that just because I think that's public knowledge at this point of something like that happening, and I can't really comment on that because I'm not her, and that's the relationship that she built and what Chris had built between each other. I know that there was some disagreements, but I think it was mostly both parties falling at the disparities of one another, just because you couldn't hold out till the end of the season or all the way through, and one side felt one party wasn't fulfilling the obligations to one another, and they just kind of had a falling out. To me, at the time, it felt like a normal falling out. I didn't know it was going to come back to hurt the brand or organization in the long term, right? To be honest, I wasn't even expecting if Riot's claiming unsafe environment, and if it was just Maria or anything like that. It was unexpected on my end, for sure.
Yamato, I want to bring you back in here. As a coach, as a player, as a member of the staff, like, how would you approach a player and an owner, for example, having an issue that could create a problem like this? What can you do about that? How do you get involved, or can you get involved?
I think, I've never been a part of a scenario where a case has been so severe where things would be called an unsafe environment, but I think anything, that has to do with LCS standards, as Rob mentioned, LCS standards in terms of housing, etc., and everything around the gaming environment, I think, from my perspective, how the players feel and how the players, live in the house and how they interact with each other and how I interact with them, it all comes down to the efficiency of practice, because if the players feel good and feel safe, then they're going to practice better and practice harder, and it's going to, in the end, reward us. So in my case, I feel like, there is more to the story than what has been told, and I think that is always the case with Riot rulings. So it's very, very hard for me to say anything specific in this scenario about this unsafe environment or problems between owners. In our case in Splice, if I have a problem, I can easily highlight it. It becomes a priority depending on how severe it is. I can mention something we had in the past. For example, now we have a problem with injuries. Instantly, it has been highlighted. We've been booked times with physiotherapists, etc. That is how we deal with issues. We just talk about it and have an open communication about it at all times. And I think that is the proper way of handling it, open communication. I think in any relationship, communication is very important.
Rob, was there a lack of communication specifically with Maria and the organization at times, do you think?
To me, in the second tier terms of management, I don't believe so. To be honest, I think myself and the current management, used to be management of Renegades, had tailored to Maria's expectation. We met her expectations, and pretty much, to be honest, in my honest opinion, from growing up from the Challenger series and all to throughout the Renegades, I think we went over and beyond what is actually expected of an LCS team, even through a Challenger level, expectations of a team. I personally had pampered to a lot of her requests and made sure that, as Yamato said, all these expected normalities of an LCS caliber team, that's what we did. When I was on site and doing all those things for all the players, we've done that and executed it pretty well, I think, from public, general expectations as well. A good proof of that is, not only did we do this for our players, Renegades players were very well taken care of, and even Selfie had spoken up about we're helping them out. We've even helped players that weren't even on our roster, despite public opinion of Renegades helping only Renegades members. I remember during a time Selfie was in a pretty terrible situation and being stuck in America. We actually reached out to him and supplied him with a house and food and paid for all that stuff and got him back to Poland with Co, actually. Now he's on Nova. These are the things that it surprises me with the ruling that they would have gone so far to remove our organization from the LCS.
So just to clarify, was there anything else besides the disagreement between Chris Badawi and Maria that you thought might have stood out and been a part of the unsafe ruling?
Unsafe ruling? I honestly, if I had to really designate it, maybe that was, that's something that could probably be tailored under those terms. But other than that, I don't think there was an unsafe environment for my players or even for my management or coaching staff.
Yamato, how is this thing kind of addressed? Like, if a player came to you and said that they felt unsafe, or if there was something like that, like, how would you even begin to tackle this as a coach? Because you're an authority figure there, and you have a position of power. So you have a player. I know that Remilia is a exception to the rule, obviously, because she's the first and to this point only female to participate in the LCS. But how do you go about managing a player who feels uncomfortable in a team house or a team environment?
Well, I think it really comes down to understanding the fact that every player is unique in their own regard. Every person is unique in their own regard, and how they work and how they are as personalities, that is what a management kind of takes care of. And the management of a team is all about taking care of these said personalities. And in this case, it's hard to give an abstract and concrete, answer, because it really comes down to the player's specific needs. And I think the management is designed always to cater to the needs of the players. And if you can't meet them, of course, you can't have the highest expectations of them. You try to kind of give the players what they always need. I think that is the point of a management at all times. But to give you a concrete answer, I can't do that, because I need like a scenario where I need a player or a person which I can kind of talk about, or put me in a scenario, then it's easier,
Well, actually, let me stop you there. I was very much an advocate of doing that for pro players, right? Like, let's take, since Maria is the topic of this conversation, let's take her for an example, right? She does get a lot of shit. She gets a lot of criticism because of her status, and I've actually been on the show once before talking about it and how it shouldn't be an issue because she should be treated like a player like everyone else. There is no special treatment that we should give in a public's opinion of her. But I will come out to admit, there are times where Maria didn't want to be on the broadcast, or she didn't want to be the main focus, so like a player cam, or if you take a look at the Renegades broadcast when she was on the roster, only 4 player photos would come up on the lineup because she requested not to be a part of that. That was me fighting with Riot, saying, hey, Maria doesn't want to do this. I need to respect her wishes as a player. I'm trying to fulfill those obligations to her. I'm trying to help her out. I'm trying to do these things. So to even admit that Renegades, didn't, committed to an unsafe environment is absolutely fucking oblivious to me, because, we've done all these things. I've gone out of my way. I've talked to Riot. I fought for her. I fought for, there are so many things that were said publicly, in people that don't know the full story, right? I've always come out of my way to, delete comments or chew them up or actively fight for her. So if there was some issue between, her and Chris or something or between the organization, that I think that we handled it pretty well. And she was actually pretty, when her departure on the Renegades, I think it was pretty easy and a good transition, because she was very cooperative. She was actually stuck out for an extra week to play for us, to make sure that we find a suitable solution, which was Hakuo at the time. And look at him now; he's on Envy, he's doing great. And we coached that up, and he became to a great support. But to speak about the unsafe environment, if you're going to target that, I could probably only think that there was expectations on each party, and one was impatient, and they weren't delivered at the time. So,
Rob, do you think it was fair to the players and staff at Renegades, because it seems to have been an organizational, a top-level management situation in terms of the ban? Do you think it was fair to the players and coaches and staff to have Riot kind of come down, drop the hammer on the entire organization?
So I can easily say that it was way too harsh. I think it was way too harsh. I think, if anything, it should have been targeted at a single person with whatever evidence they got. If there was evidence, I would like to see it, just because it's evidence against my organization and how it was ran or how things were dealt with. Just so you know, like all the guys on them below, like we went out to out of our way to take care of it, and it sucks because the punishment, the ban. I hate to. Look, I love Riot and how they provide infrastructure, LCS, yada, 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 the normal stuff, but it's like, when you do like this death blow to an organization, it is a death blow. Like the Renegades disbanded. Like they were sold off, like all the assets were sold off and like given away or in talks of being sold off.
And the CSGO team's now gone as well, so it even extends to other games. Oh yeah,
it is certainly a death blow. I'm not sure if we're gonna come back or in a year, not sure. But it's like I said, I like Riot and what they do, but it's like I love how their motto is, players' well-being is first, whatever. But in all honesty, the ruling, of course, it affected us, but it also, made everyone's path go all in different directions or made people retire. Like all these things need to be taken into consideration to like giving a death blow to an organization, right? Like why not some other tier of punishment? Like you can go back on like previous rulings, right? The retroactive battle ban, right? The current one with ours, it's just like super, super far. At least like something where in the ruling it states like the organization is put together and they have to sell off the organization at least, right? Like my job in particular got pretty much crushed down into the ground because I built up a baby, I built up a brand, I helped build up a team, and then look at the results of like Team Envy right now. That's like the ex-Renegades. Like imagine if Renegades is still together. That's a fucking top 2 team right now. Like it sucks. Like it's like, oh wow, we were like 10th place and now we could Envy is. They struck a gold mine when we had to force a sell to them, and it's like we couldn't even reap the rewards of that because that roster is no longer ours. It's like, oh wow, where did the Team Envy team come from? It's because it's ex-Renegades members. Like when I said that we were top 2 in a score interview, whatever, I wasn't lying. Like that team was so good, and now. All that hard work that I put in and all the management put in will never get to see a live day. Sure, players get it because they'll maybe go on to something else, like Crumbs go to the Apex and coach. They have something to look forward to, but like, we're working behind the scenes of like that are not personalities, and it definitely affects us in our livelihoods. Right. I have to do entire change of my life because of this ban.
Right.
Like I have to worry about what's the next thing that I have to work on to. Sure, maybe I have a little bit of securities of the networking opportunities that Renegades provided me, but it's like my entire life has changed because of this ban.
Yeah, and we should clarify as well that the CSGO team is still existing, but affected very much by the League of Legends team because you lose that the income that comes from having a pro LCS team involved with your organization. Yamato, I don't want to get too fixated on this one part of the ban, but obviously it seems to have been a big part of the ruling from what we know. I want to ask you kind of a tough question, a general question. Would you feel comfortable as a coach being results-oriented having, at this point, a woman on your team?
A woman on your team?
Yeah.
Like, we have a sub that happens to be a girl.
I guess, so. I mean, like a starter, like, would you feel comfortable taking on the Remilia situation is what I mean? Like, having a starter be on the spotlight being on you every week in that situation. Would you feel comfortable being put there when you want the results first?
Well, personally, like, I like, all these players that people say they are uncoachable or are hard coaching situations, to me, they are interesting because, I think those are the situations you learn from the most. In the past, I was the coach of Meet Your Makers and, I think everyone has heard of the shitstorm that happened there, you know. I came out of that, you know, we went 10th place and there was a lot of shit going on there, you know. There was a lot of horrible things, you know. It was completely fucked up. And with that in mind, you know, I'm happy I went through that because, you know, I learned a lot through that, you know, coming through hell and back, I learned a lot. And I think, you know, these players that people say are hard to coach, are uncoachable, I think they are very intriguing because they're interesting. I feel like I personally can learn a lot from them. But sure, maybe in the moment when you have them in front of you, it can be very exhausting and draining. But I think in the end, it depends on what you take from it. And I think it could be a very good experience. But something I would like to add on the general ruling overall, I felt like my main focus, why I felt that the focus on the unsafe environment, because that was like the only thing that was very obvious that it was bullshit. From my perspective, you know, it feels like the entire thing is bullshit because usually when it comes to these bans that Riot do, it's all about playing on the public perception of the people. You know, they don't tend to give out any kind of proof because they don't have to. They just play on the public perception of what people have, like depending on the person that they ban. Like I've been a victim of it as well, but it's not as severe as this situation. But at that time, it was very severe. It was back in season 2 when people wanted to qualify to the LCS. I had the situation with Team Solo Mebdi when I played in a team with 2 very, very toxic players at the time. It was Jensen and Darkwing Jax. And of course, I would be silly if I didn't go through Riot and made sure there were set guidelines for what we had to do. And then at the final day before we were at the airport, we had boot camp for 2 weeks. We invested our time and money. We skipped school. One guy had to jump out of school because he couldn't skip 2 weeks. And we invested a lot of time and our emotion at that time. You know, season 2, you know, the game wasn't really massive at that time. Sure, it was big, but it wasn't really top scale in terms of organization and the money involved. And we were so-called tribunal banned at the final hour when we were at the airport. And then when we asked for, of course, you know, proof, you know, tribunal ban, there is always a tribunal case if that happens. They couldn't provide us with that at that time. So I feel, you know, it was very, very easy for them to ban us because there was a public perception about the players that were toxic at that time. And it was very, very easy to hang us out as the bad guys because nobody else would believe our side of the story because Riot is the big guy, you know, Riot is, you know, the big brother overall. And I feel like this scenario is very, very similar to that. And I think other competitive rulings are very, very similar to that because I kind of get the same vibe off of it, you know. I know Chris Badai personally. I've talked with a lot of players that were on Renegades, and it felt like Renegades was a team that I wanted to be a part of because it just sounded very, very good. You know, it sounded very comfortable, and in general, it seemed to me that everything was managed very, very properly from an outside perspective.
Yeah, in the interest of full disclosure here, my personal impression of Chris was always a positive one. Don't know what happened behind closed doors. Don't know what happened in private conversations. We cannot know that because Riot does not release evidence to let us know what happened in those conversations or in those events. Rob, just to confirm, you yourself have not received any evidence of these events that took place that led to the ruling?
Okay, so that's interesting, right? I'm going to tell you right now, no, I haven't. But I'll build off of Yamato's topic, right? No one has owned the football and run a league. No one's been able to grasp that IP, right? That's what makes esports a little bit different because developers involved. Okay, so I totally get that. I totally get that. You know, Riot Games owns, Riot Games owns League of Legends, and they run the IP and they run the esports competitive. Totally get that. Love it. Great. There's someone that, you know, runs their game, but the way they handled it, I don't think was the optimal way of doing it. Even though they come out with, an ex-rioter said that, they come out with a ruling, they all have to agree with it, yada yada yada. But here's the thing: there was no like system in place for it to like stop the build-up from happening, instead of getting just straight to a ban and like essentially changing the lives of 9 different people that are in the League of Legends team, and then also 6 people from a CSGO team, and then 5 people from a Halo team, right? Like it ruptured and it like disbanded the entire org without some form of system. I would rather have, taken up the mantle of saying, like a rioter coming out to say, hey, we're getting these reports that there's an unsafe environment. Could you maybe verify with this? And, maybe a rioter stops by the house and just like checks out our infrastructure for a day of 24 hours or something like that. Some form of like verification that, I'm not sure what it means, right? Like, I don't know what is this distinct thing. Like, I thought, you have to understand where I was at my shoes. Like, at that point, I was like at a Halo event once I like saw the article online when someone messaged it to me. Like, I didn't even know that we were going to get banned. I was on this train of like, oh my gosh, like this split, maybe we can like find like some VC corporation to take over the Renegades, like get a whole bunch of funding. I could promise my players, 6-figure salaries, things like these, give them everything they wanted because I'm working, the business side of things to help them excel and, even past their career, their longevity of the career, right? Like past their current one. But those are the things that I was working at the time. And then one day I just wake up or, after an event, I found out that my team is disbanding. And it's totally a game changer. It just sucks to me that there was some form of like steps to get to that level, right? There was no fair warning or even prep. Like if I had prep, let's say like I knew that Renegades was going to get banned in like 2 weeks prior, I would have at least prepped for it, right? I would have been at least able to adjust my daily lives or something, or even maybe attempt to fix it, or some form of appeal system. Not exactly sure, but I just feel like we went from 0 to 100 really, really quick.
Rob, you talk about a support system from Riot. They obviously knew you were bringing in the first female player to compete in the LCS stage. Did Riot ever provide any assistance specific to that, or was it up to the organization to handle all of that itself?
They were very willing to work with us. Like I said, when Maria had requested something, I talked to Riot and said, hey, these are the things. They even threatened to fine us for not getting Maria's pictures done, which we did. We just preferred not to. But, even Chris Badowie came out of his way to say, okay, if she doesn't want to get the pictures done, I'll just pay for the fines. It's fine. So here, take that into consideration, right? We're an organization that was willing to get docked money for us to provide a player's comfortability. So let's take that for an example. Let's look at that picture, right? Riot can look at that as, okay, they didn't meet the requirements, therefore 1 red strike, and we would have never known.
Yeah, it seems like a shame we're spending so much time on this issue discussing just the one point, which was Remilia being part of the team and then leaving, but Riot has really not given us any other points to discuss, right? It's just a blanket ruling. There's no evidence given, no specificity as far as what the unsafe environment was beyond what we know just from talking to people and from public knowledge. So it's difficult to discuss beyond that. I want to ask you now, as we get kind of towards the modern day, how you transitioned, Rob, from the Renegade situation towards working now with Energy Esports.
Well, working with Energy Esports is in an unofficial capacity at the moment.
Right.
Right now, I'm just kind of testing the waters with different teams. A little bit more with Energy. That will come up a little bit later this week. But I was in Berlin. I was helping out the Misfits, trying to help them get that asset sold out because, the Renegades Bandito also got banned. So I know some guy from the Sci-Fi Channel owns the Misfits. So, I guess not from the Sci-Fi Channel, but some form of lineage there. Just essentially helping out teams and testing the waters of future endeavors that I'll be participating in.
Do you feel like you've been kind of put adrift by Riot's ruling and how sudden it was in your career? The only pro here that I can really see, because I'm an optimist, is that I get the freedom to do other things, and Renegades have provided me a valuable network of opportunities that I can rely on. Monty has been very, very supportive, and he said, he'd give me a recommendation anywhere, and it's definitely been a rough road to travel. I could have been on Envy, but Envy had refused to take myself and Matt
because Matt was going off to school, and they refused to take the 2 managers because I'm a general manager. I deal with I'm an esports guy, and I had Matt Akavan to do the league side, so I would have either just been League of Legends side, and Matt kind of gets fucked over. So I could have gone with Envy. I decided not to because I didn't want to like screw over another person at that time. So Matt gets to stay on Envy. I get to go somewhere else that I've been able to secure. But yeah, like future endeavors, it's an eye opener, and hopefully there's something out there that I could fit my shoes, like fit my feet in with shoes.
Kind of pulling back on this now, Yamato, looking at the whole situation, hearing from Rob now, as a member of an LCS team staff, like what does it make you think, or how does it affect the way you go about your own business when you see how dramatically and how quickly another organization from top to bottom can be just cleaned out by Riot's rulings like this?
I think, a part of it is the beauty of how life works. If you're going to live every day by day thinking there's a chance that your organization might disappear because of some ruling with no background at all, then you're just not going to enjoy living your life at all. It's like walking in the street, there's a chance you might get hit by a car. I don't think putting these type of things into consideration will help you at all, because I think you should only focus on things you can affect. In this case, in the things that I can't affect and I've chosen to be a part of, I need to have trust and faith. Otherwise, I will go crazy and I'll pull out my hair, because I think taking all risks that you take every single day and putting them on a table and kind of thinking about it, then it's crazy. For all you know, the next time you drink water, it might be poisoned. You can't really live life like that. It's just impossible.
Those wise words from Yamato Cannon. I think we've come full circle on this discussion. I want to thank Rob for joining us to discuss this touchy issue, particularly as he tries to figure things out for himself. I want to wish Rob all the best as well. Good luck to you as you move forward with your career.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the show, guys.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure having you on again. And I want to thank, of course, Yamato for filling in, as he does every week, our beautiful, well-spoken, well-voiced, eloquent co-host here on Beyond the Lane. And I'll thank everyone for watching us as well. Thank you. The viewers at home. I already have. Not the first time. That's it for today. Same time next week on the same channel. Be here with us, please. I implore you to do so. Once again, thanks and have a good night.